It's an 11,000-kilometer journey from Brazil to the Persian Gulf. But when conflict erupts here, the impact lands directly in your wallet. This is the Estreito of Hormuz, a waterway just 33 kilometers wide, separating Iran and Oman. Through this gap flows roughly 20% of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas. It is the global economy's most critical energy artery. Right now, escalating military tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran have paralyzed this route. Commercial shipping has plummeted as vessels avoid the high risk of a strike. The immediate result is a severe supply shock. With millions of barrels trapped, the price of Brent crude oil has spiked, easily breaching $100 a barrel on the international market. But if you live in Brazil, you might wonder why this matters to you. Thanks to massive offshore pre-salt reserves, Brazil extracts enough crude oil to be entirely self-sufficient. However, pulling crude out of the ocean doesn't make a country immune. This distant blockade has triggered an invisible chain reaction that is already heading straight for the Brazilian consumer. The first domino falls at the refinery. Brazil exports raw, unrefined oil, but it lacks the industrial capacity to process all the fuel it consumes. To make up the difference, it has to buy derivatives from abroad, primarily diesel. Because Brazil imports this fuel, the domestic cost is tied to the international market. When the price of Brent crude shoots up because of a blockade in the Middle East, the numbers on this gas station sign climb with it. Diesel is the lifeblood of the Brazilian economy. Over 60% of all physical goods in the country are transported over the road network. A sudden spike in the price of diesel instantly makes every kilometer traveled more expensive. The cost to run those transport trucks skyrockets overnight. Because the nation moves on rubber tires, an imported fuel crisis functions as an immediate, invisible tax on the delivery of absolutely everything you buy. But fuel is only half the problem. The Strait of Hormuz is also a critical artery for the petrochemicals and natural gas required to grow our food. Brazil is an agricultural powerhouse, but its soil requires massive amounts of imported nitrogen fertilizers like urea, heavily sourced from the Persian Gulf region. Combine the sudden scarcity of these fertilizers with the soaring cost of diesel needed to run this heavy machinery, and you get a massive spike in the base cost to produce a single grain of soy or corn. Farmers cannot absorb those compounding expenses. They have to pass them up the supply chain, meaning that production spike inevitably lands on the supermarket shelf as severe food inflation. Even the crops destined for export face a massive hurdle. With the strait blocked, international shipping vessels have to take long, convoluted detours, sending maritime freight rates through the roof. On top of the extra fuel and time, shipping companies now demand exorbitant war risk insurance premiums just to operate anywhere near the Middle East. For Brazilian exporters, the math stops working. Adding these bloated logistical costs to commodities like soy and meat strips away their competitive pricing advantage, especially when trying to sell to vital markets in Asia. The blockade places a stranglehold on the entire agricultural pipeline. It punishes the farmer with crushing input costs before the seed is even planted, and then prices them out of the global market once the harvest is ready. There is a strange irony to all of this. When Brent crude prices soar, the Brazilian federal government and Petrobras actually rake in billions in unexpected revenue, royalties, and dividends. But those state-level profits offer zero protection to the ordinary citizen. While the government's balance sheet improves, the value of the cash in your pocket is eroded by the rising cost of groceries. As food and freight inflation spread across the economy, the central bank is forced to step in to keep the financial system from overheating. Their primary weapon against this imported inflation is the Selic rate. To cool down prices, they have to abandon plans to cut interest rates and may even be forced to raise them aggressively. A high Selic rate hits you immediately. Mortgages become expensive, credit card debt spirals, businesses pause hiring, and consumer spending freezes. This crisis reveals a hard limit to traditional energy goals. Sovereignty isn't measured by raw oil in the ground, but by the strength of the refineries and supply chains that turn it into a standard of living. Until Brazil builds the capacity to process its own fuel, produce its own fertilizers, and diversify its logistical network, a conflict 11,000 kilometers away will always dictate the price of life at home. If you want to understand the hidden forces shaping your money, hit like, subscribe, and follow the hashtag Educación Financiera.